HaKadosh Boker Tov. In this week's Parashat, we find something very interesting. Avraham Avinu, his entire midah, everything that he stood for was midat Chesed. How do we see that? From everything that happened with the angels. Avraham could have exempted himself in every way and form of doing Chesed. He's the third day after the Brit Milah. He's suffering. It's not easy. But what does he want? He wants that there should be Chesed in the world. So what does he do? He comes and he's waiting and he's yearning. And he comes and he's waiting. When is somebody going to come to visit me? Fine. But something very interesting happens we're going to see in the Parashat, when all of a sudden Avraham Avinu has to come and he has to divorce to send away, right, Hagar and his son Yishmael. And it's something very interesting. Do you know that Rav Shach was once coming and he said, how do you make and how do you build a Beit Yehudi? I want to build a Jewish house, a Jewish home. How do you build a Jewish home? He says, you know how? Midot tovot. If the couple are coming and they're building their foundation, they're building their home with what we call midot tovot, everything will be good. Everything will be good, right? And now he comes the Rav Wolbe and he says, why are they called midot? Rav Wolbe was known to be one of the greatest of the mashkichim in the previous generation. And he says, why are they called midot? Right? You know, you could call it anything. Attributes. Why are they called midot? And he says something very interesting. He says, because everything has to be with a midah. Everything has to be with a measure. And he says, for example, rachmanut, to have mercy, it's something positive. Cruelty is something negative. However, though, the midrash itself says, anybody that becomes merciful on the ones which are cruel, at the end will become cruel on those that are merciful. Which means that even in midot, sometimes there's a measure. Sometimes you have to play it one way or the other way, in the way that you have to actually form it. And therefore what happens is that it has to come with a brain, with knowledge, with understanding. How exactly is it going to work? How's it going? How are we doing this? And that's why it's so important. Avraham Avinu was midat chesed. We know that it was just giving and giving and giving. That was what it was. The way that the tent was, the way how everything was. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has mercy on him. So he sends him, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends him, right? The three angels, in order that he could do chesed with these three angels. Okay, very good. What is it? What is the reason why Avraham Avinu is a muda chesed and he's doing kiruv rechokim all the time and he's bringing everyone closer to Hashem and he's converting everybody? And all of a sudden, he is commanded to do two actions which are the exact opposite. The oxymoron of chesed. Number one, when he separates from Lot. That was already in last week's parasha. But he separates from Lot when he sees that there's a machloka between his shepherds and their shepherds. And number two, the sending away of his wife Hagar and Yishmael, his son. The Rambam actually says that the sending away of Hagar and Yishmael was the 9th of the 10 tests, the 10 trials of Avraham Avinu. Because since Avraham Avinu was Isha Chesed, and now he was commanded to listen to his wife to send them away, it's mamash, he's sending them away. This is the exact opposite. He's coming and he's bringing closer everybody, and he's doing Chesed with everybody. And then with his own son Yishmael and his own wife Hagar, he's going to send them away? What's going on over? So we know that it's obviously Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim, that sometimes you're not allowed to do chesed. Sometimes it's a sur to do chesed, even on family members. And now we have to understand. And let's try to go into understanding, what does that mean? Does that make sense that I'm going to tell you now there exists a time when you're not allowed to do chesed? When you have to actually be cruel on those which are actually even the closest to you? What does that mean? And therefore, this sugya, this learning, we're going to try to it starts already in Parashat Lech Lecha, and then it continues in Parashat Vayera in this week's Parashat. So we know that at the end of last week's Parashat in Lech Lecha, it says, Vayera ki arata v'tekal gevivta be'enea. Hagar saw that she became pregnant. And she conceived immediately. If you actually remember, Rashi there says that she conceived immediately, and she actually even had a miscarriage because of the Ain Rav Sarah, that how could it be the first time, boom, and she becomes pregnant? What's going on? But she became pregnant again, and then she had Yishmael. And what's interestingly enough is that all of a sudden she comes and she says, 1 second, how could it be that Sarah Imenu was such a big tzadeket? What? God should have... It's not because of Avraham. She became pregnant immediately. What's going on? So maybe Sarah only looks like a tzadeket. You understand? Maybe she looks like it. She puts on a good show. But really, be'emet, she's not there. And that's why it says, Vayera ki arata. She saw she became pregnant, v'tekal givirta be'enea. So Sarai comes and she tells Avraham Avinu, Chamasi alecha, Hamas on you. Why? I gave you my maidservant. And now she becomes pregnant. And now all of a sudden you let her disgrace me? You let her look upon me in a negative fashion? This is what you're doing? So what happens? Yishpot Hashem beni uvenecha. So Abraham tells to Sarai, do whatever you want. So she comes, right? And she afflicts her and she runs away. Parashat Vayera, they're living together because Hagar was told to come back by the Malach. And all of a sudden, Sarah sees Hagar, right, the son of Hagar Mitzrit, that he's mitzachek. So he tells Avraham Avinu, this guy, he's mitzachek. Obviously, we know mitzachek is doing avodah zarah, murder, adultery, all these other things. She says, get him away. Get rid of him. He's not going to be with my son. You have to get rid of him. Take him away, far away. That's what you have to do. Some Rishonim, they actually look at the actions of Sarah as a sin. The fact that she caused the God to suffer. The Ramban, for example, Nachmanides says that the fact that Sarah caused affliction to Hagar, her children in the future, Yishmael, are going to cause us afflictions in the future, which means that we are suffering for that which Sarah made Hagar suffer. That's the Ramban, Nachmanides. And remember, this is 500 years ago, right? Or more than that, actually, right? Because the Ramban was one of the Rishonim, right? That when he's writing these words. But other ones, right, are not saying that. They actually saw that that's what you're supposed to do. Why? In the fact that she started disgracing Sarah, Sarah had to do that. And now we have to understand where exactly are we going. So the rabbis tell us, what does the word mitzachek mean? That he started doing averot. Okay? Started doing averot. So once he started doing averot, she comes and she says, send him away. What was the argument between Avraham and Sarah? Avraham and Sarah, there was a dialogue here. Maybe it could be that we don't actually see the full dialogue, but there's obviously something going on here. What was the conversation between them? So there's a Tosefta. And the Tosefta says, Garesh et ha'ama azot ve'bena, right? Divorce this woman and her child, right? Get her rid of them. Milamed sha'ita Sarah ro'a et Yishmael bonem b'masim v'tzad chagavim alem aktir. She saw that he was doing avodah zarah. And since he was doing avodah zarah, right, what happened is he wanted to do this. So he comes, Amra, she said, Shema yilmod Yitzchak kach v'yelech v'yavod kach. Maybe be'emet Yitzchak is going to learn, and he's also going to do avodah zarah. And the fact that he's also going to do avodah zarah, it's a chilul Hashem. What's going on over here? So he comes and he tells her, right, la'achar. So he comes and he says like this. He says, 1 second. Zachin la'adam shelo b'panav. What does that mean? So he comes and he explains, right, the following. So he says, since zachin la'adam shelo b'panav, chavino, which means, 1 second, if right now, right, we are bringing other people from the outside into our house, the people that are already inside, we're going to get rid of them? He says, what's going on exactly? How could it be? That's not going to be even a bigger chilul Hashem. Imagine right now, everyone's going to say, look what a Bal Chesed Avraham Avinu is, and his own family members, he's sending them away. Something's wrong. Something doesn't make sense. So she went and she said, no, but since there's a chilul Hashem, and that's what you're saying, it's a chilul Hashem, let's ask Hashem. Chilul Hashem means it's a desecration of the name of Hashem. So let's ask Hashem. Let him decide what is the right. And what is the right decision? What does he say? Whatever Sarai Menu tells you, you listen. Yeah, that's what he tells him. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Abraham, I agree to Sarah. Get rid of him. Okay, fine. So now the Torah, which is Torah Chaim, and the Torah is telling us a story, we have to learn Musar from this story. So when we're going to understand the beginning of this going off the path, started with one thing. When Hagar started being mizalzel, when she started disgracing Sarai men. Rashi even says that she was saying in front of her, Sarah zu en sitra kigluya. Her inside is not like the outside. Means she's a two-face. Yeah, so she shows that she's a tzaddiket and she's not. So Rav the Mashkiach, Rav Gedalia Eisman says, what exactly is Hagar saying? Right? Do you really think that she's not a tzaddiket but she doesn't have children? Sometimes you have the biggest tzaddikot in the world and they're barren. What do you want? They're sterile. What does that mean? So he says, but rather be'emet, right? He comes and it says that you just see how negative this is. You say there's nobody that suffered so much like Klal Yisrael. So what does Hagar want to laugh about? Not because a person suffers doesn't mean that they're not tzaddikim. A person could suffer and suffer and suffer, but that doesn't mean that they're not a tzaddik. And that's what we're trying to show us. Not because Sarai Menu didn't become pregnant right away. Well, she wasn't a tzaddiket. She was one of the biggest tzaddikets. Okay. Number two, after they already went and they divorced them. They got rid of them. They sent them off the path. What does it say? Rashi says she went back to her avodah zarah. Now the question is, how could it be? She left her father's house willingly. She wanted to go to Avraham Avinu as a maidservant. She was a princess. She was the daughter of the king, a princess. She went on her own to Avraham Avinu. How could it be all of a sudden now that she goes back? But rather you see, right, that the concept is very, very interesting, right? That how does she go back? What's going on? Also, when all of a sudden her son comes and there's no water, right? What does she do? She throws her son away. She doesn't go close to her son. What cruelty is that? So if Shimshon Rafal Hirsch explains that was an incredible cruelty. He says, why? Because he says everything that Hagar was doing, right, was showing the teva of the Bat Cham, that she came from Cham. And that's why he says, you know why? Because a Jewish mother would never leave the child. Do you know, there was a very, very sad story. Last night I gave a mishman. And when I was giving the mishman, I was giving them a shiur on end-of-life issues and something which was called mercy killing. Yeah, something which is called mercy killing. There was a case called Alta Fixler. I don't know if you heard of this case, where basically what happened is that the UK government pulled the plug. What does it mean they pulled the plug? Alta Fixler, she was born with certain type of brain damage, and therefore she was on life support, and she was on there for a long time. And in the UK, what happened was the Manchester board, they went and they were going back and forth. They said they wanted to pull the plug. They went and they took it to courts. They got Israel involved, the US involved. The Democratic Schumer went and he spoke to the Prime Minister of England. And they said, bring them to the US or to Israel. They won't pay a thing because everything was being footed out, the entire bill. And they were going to keep her on life support. The Manchester, board or whatever it is, the court, they decided that everything was in the well-being, right, of what the parents and the orthodoxy of the parents and everything. And what did they say? Right? They're going to pull the plug. They decide when to pull the plug. Not only that, the parents said, okay, fine, if you're already doing that, let her die at home, not in the hospital. So with the entire family, right, they were there and they were singing songs of chizuk. They pulled the plug on Monday. Yeah, she started breathing on her own for 90 minutes until that's it, until she passed away, a 2-year-old little baby. Yeah, here's the picture of this 2-year-old little baby. Yeah, after that, they show the picture, right, of the father with the young boy, the son, right, with the child. Yeah, right now. And they went and they said that we weren't able to save them. A Jewish parent, a Jewish person, will never just abandon the child. Why? Because that means that they don't want to suffer. And they're not thinking about the child. They would be there until the end. When Hagar comes and she throws away the child, but the child will die, I mean, she's only thinking about herself. That's cruelty. The cruelty also was in this case, because they are the ones that are going to decide life and death. When at the end of the day, they are told, just send her off. Send her to Israel. Send her to the US. Send her somewhere else. But at the end of the day, there's certain cruelties and they call themselves a democracy. Democracy is the freedom of life. They shouldn't be the one that's coming and choosing life and death. That's not in their hands. Especially if they're being told that everything is going to be paid for. What do they care sending them off somewhere else? But rather they think that they know it better, that they know better, that they're understanding better. But that's the cruelty that we're talking about. Another type of cruelty that we see is, right, that we said when they threw him underneath one of the bushes. And it says that she came and she threw him tachat achad sichim, underneath. So Shimon Shel Rufal says, right, where did he fall? Saying in between the thorns, right? I don't understand. He's already thirsty. What are you throwing him into a thorn bush? What are you doing? But again, you see the same thing. She wasn't paying a part of the suffering of the child. What does she say in the Torah? She said, she doesn't want to see the death of the child. For her, the entire thing is for herself. Do you know there was somebody that once came and I said, right, that I wanted them to come when they're collecting tzedakah, and I wanted them to hear the reasons why people are collecting tzedakah. So I go up there and I start reading the reasons. Somebody goes to me, Rabbi, don't tell us the reasons. Just tell us somebody's collecting, we pay. I said, that's a problem. I said, you know why? Because that means when you're giving tzedakah, you're not giving tzedakah because you want to help. You're giving tzedakah because you don't want to hear problems. Right? You're being egoistic. It's for yourself. Tzedakah is supposed to be because I feel for them. I feel that I want them to grow. I want them to continue going. That's what you're supposed to do. And that's why it's just so important for us to understand that. The Mashkiach Rav Gedalia comes and he says, Hagar, right, always stayed like a Shivcha Mitzrit. She was always like the Egyptian servant, right? Because Besar Chamonim Besaram, which means that in the house of Avraham Avinu, when you get to a certain level, it doesn't go. It doesn't go together. And therefore now we actually understand, right, the explanation of what's going on with Avraham Avinu. Okay? And he comes and he says like this. When it says Vatelech Vateta, that she went and she got lost, right? She got lost. What does that mean? Also by Lot was the same story. By Lot, there was an argument. What was the argument? Money. They come and they say, by the way, you know, this anyway was belong to Abraham. Right now, it doesn't belong to Abraham. It belongs to Abraham in the future. So what are you doing now? No. For them, everything is ours. Everything is ours. Everything is to do with us. We don't look at other people. Everything is to do with us. So therefore, Avraham Avinu comes and he has a problem. I can't stay with it. This is a Chilul Hashem in itself. So what is he supposed to do? I don't want any fights between us. So why? We're brothers. So why didn't he make him do teshuvah? And the answer is because Avraham Avinu was a house where everything was Hashem. And he saw that if he was going to keep quiet of what was going on, whether it was with Lot, or whether it was going to be, and he didn't want to fight. And he knows that if he's going to tell Lot something, it's going to become a fight. So what does he do? Separate. Far away. Keep your distance. Because if you're going to try to make them to do teshuvah, and they're not going to listen, all they're going to do is fight with you, there's nothing what to do. Stay far away. Avraham Avinu, and that's what the Torah was actually teaching us. The Torah was teaching us something very, very important. The Torah was teaching us, right, the following lesson. That which the Chacham says, et lachabok, ve'et lirchok mechabek. There's a time to hug, and sometimes there's a time to run away from hugs. What does that mean? We have to know when to bring close and when to keep far away, when to keep the distance, right? Because even on somebody as great as Avraham Avinu, that his entire concept was chesed, that his entire concept was everything of kiruv and bringing closer to Hashem, sometimes he had to know also when to keep the distance. In the case of Hagar Yishmael, it was a big trial. It was very difficult because at the end of the day, it was his son. It was his second wife. It was more difficult, and that's why the Rambam said it was a test. But once he heard that that was the will of Hashem, that he had to do that, there was nothing else what to do. The will of Hashem, I have to do no matter what. And therefore, even though I'm the most merciful person in the world, sometimes mercy is cruelty, and sometimes cruelty is mercy. He had to do that in order to continue. Later on, he does go and he fights for Lot to bring him back and everything that you want, because again of Chilul Hashem. Because if you remember, they were going to say that they captured Avraham, because Lot looked like Avraham. It was his nephew. So he looked like him. So people were saying, they captured Avraham Avinu. So Avraham Avinu said, I can't let Chilul Hashem. So he went to fight until the death to make sure that they didn't have him anymore. Because again, to stop from Chilul Hashem. But Abraham's mission in life was no Chilul Hashem, that sometimes we have to understand. Sometimes they ask us, when is it? How do you know when to do Kiruv, not to do Kiruv? How do you bring close? When to do Chesed, not to do Chesed? The Torah is what defines us. What is Chesed? The Torah is what defines us. When to do the Kiruv? We have to know, we have to be very careful. Sometimes a person comes, they do Kiruv and they go all the way down. And you looked at them in the beginning and say, wow, they were a religious person. What happened afterwards? But rather, Be'emet, the reason why is because, again, as we already mentioned, we have to understand that Kiruv is not just ABC, I'm just doing it. We have to know how to do it, when to do it. There are certain ways. And that's with everything in life. Everything in life is midot. Everything in life is a measure. You have to measure up. What I'm doing now, is that positive? Is it negative? Sometimes you could be cruel, even to your own child. And that's being the most merciful. Sometimes we don't even pay attention. Sometimes you come and you tell the child, don't have the candy. Why are you so cruel? Be merciful. They want a candy, let them enjoy. But you're going to tell them, what are you talking about? They have all these cavities. They had this, they had that. And afterwards, it was causing problems in the teeth. And then afterwards, they have this and that and root canals. And so I'm the one that's being merciful. You're right. But not everyone knows that. So sometimes what you look at could be even cruel. Sometimes that's merciful. And the same way is with everything in life. Sometimes you're going to tell a child, I don't want you to go to that party. Why are you being so cruel? But no, that not letting them go to that party is actually being the most merciful person in the world. Because you don't want them to go into a place where there's going to be, whether it's drugs, whether it's going to be smoking, whether it's going to be alcohol, whether it's going to be, and then it ruins their lives. It ruins everything that they have around them. So therefore, it's incumbent upon us to realize, et lechabek, right? Sometimes we have to come and we have to hug. We have to embrace. We have to bring closer. We have to do chesed. And sometimes we have to realize now is not the time. For this is not. When there's Chilul Hashem involved, when there's other things involved, well, it could be even our own spiritual failures or downfalls. That it doesn't. Chayecha kol min, our life comes first. And when our life comes first, this is what we're supposed to do. Chazak Baruch. We'll be in touch.